So we've got this is a big week in the sports world in general. We've kind of had a bit of a lull, but we're back into it with both the NBA Finals, which we'll talk about later, and what we're going to talk about now, the Stanley Cup Finals, with the matchup being finalized earlier this week when Edmonton beat Dallas in Game 6 at home. They are going to take on the Florida Panthers starting on Saturday. This is a really interesting matchup. Obviously, first time the Oilers have been to the Cup Finals since 2006. First time the Panthers have been to the Finals since last year. A couple, um, obviously varying different levels of playoff experience. But I think it's a really exciting matchup. There's lots of different storylines here, lots of different ways we can take a conversation about this. But I'll just kind of throw it over to you, Simon, in terms of what do you think of this matchup, and is this finals matchup you're excited for?
I'm really excited for it. I think it's going to be really, really good. I mean, you could. Edmonton has been underestimated pretty much the whole playoff run as a whole. So, at the very least, it's been exciting to kind of watch their run, even as a fan of a rival team, just see how far they've gone. And Florida has kind of done what we all expected them to do. They definitely had the easiest route out of all the Eastern powerhouses there, and they pretty much the big surprise was obviously them beating the Rangers, I think, more than anything. But obviously both the teams deserve to be here. I think that should go without saying. I think Edmonton's really, really shown that they belong at the upper echelon of those playoff teams, and they showed that. Beating Dallas in 6 was very, very impressive, and they especially with how how high I was on Dallas going into that one. So between the two teams, it's going to be really good. There's a couple of Flames players on that Florida team, so you know that rivalry is still just waiting to be ignited again. I think it's going to be a super physical series. I like the matchup a lot. I think both teams have a lot of elite potential, and never in my life did I think I'd be saying that Stuart Skinner and Bobrovsky would be a hell of a goaltending matchup, but here we are in 2024 with that being the case. But I'm really excited for it. This is going to be a really good Cup final. I think I'm more excited for this one than I was last year. At least in my opinion. I think it's a very, very interesting matchup.
Yeah, and I think especially, with a couple things. I think it's super exciting for us, just with it being, like, close to home, obviously. It obviously creates a little bit of a moral dilemma, because do you cheer for the first Canadian team to win the Cup, or do you cheer against the Oilers as Flames fans? I never thought I'd admit this, but this is going to be heresy.
It is heresy.
I do think I'm cheering for the Oilers here. Hear me out. It's not because they're Canada's team, because I do think that's kind of garbage, because I think most Flames fans will be against me here. Just because my dad's an Oilers fan, and watching him is like, I'm not going to cheer against my dad at this point. But I do think that part of it is interesting. First chance for a Canadian team to win the Cup since 1993, when Montreal won, and it's really interesting that Edmonton has done it, because I feel like for so many years they would be predicted to be the ones to go to the Cup final. They'd be predicted to be the ones to win, because obviously you look at their roster and how could they not? And every single year they would fall short. Because they would just come up against a better team and wouldn't be able to prevail, just because of a lot of the times how poor their depth was. They often fell to very good teams. You can't necessarily blame them. It's not like they got upset. They just got outplayed. You look against teams like the Avs, against teams like the Golden Knights. But for once, we're seeing that this is an Oilers team that can actually roll 4 lines. They actually are, like you said, getting good goaltending, getting hot in the playoffs. It just seems like everything is kind of meshing together for them. It'll be really interesting to see whether they can actually take it that one step farther. I think for me, that series against Dallas was a bit of I think that was the threshold in terms of where this team had been before. That was the one time where they beat a team that had depth, that had playoff experience, that they weren't necessarily supposed to beat. So I think that was a huge reason why the Oilers have to be confident going into the finals.
Yeah, and I had Dallas over Edmonton, and I was fairly confident on it. In my head, even going into I remember this whole playoff run, I had been saying that coming out of the West is either Dallas or Vegas. That first round series between them two decides the West. I was very confident in that because whether it be Vancouver on the other side, whether it be Edmonton, whether it be Kings or Nashville, like it was one of those teams was not going to upset Dallas or Vegas, and here we are now, right? Like where Edmonton was actually able to beat the big powerhouse out of the West, and we're living in a world where all of a sudden Flames fans have to choose between Florida and fucking Edmonton. It's a hell of a world to live in. I don't know how to feel yet. I don't think I'm cheering for either, because I agree with you. I think it'd be. I think we got to break the curse. We got to break the curse. I'm so sick of hearing Canadian team hasn't won since '93. I'm very sick of that. But having it be Edmonton hurts. But the only reason doesn't. The only reason I can find that it doesn't hurt that bad is McDavid's going to win one eventually, right? Like, there's no way unless he moves on somewhere else and goes and plays in America like every other Canadian star, chances are he's going to win one eventually in Edmonton over the next 20 years. Let's get it over with. He could have his one, no more. Never again, right?
And
I'd be okay with that.
Yeah, I think the McDavid part is another thing that's really interesting here, because obviously you look at a player of his caliber and you kind of would have expected him to have won one already.
Yeah.
It's the kind of thing where you look at it and you say, like, all of these superstars obviously playing in a different time. You look at Gretzky, you look at Lemieux, and you say the one knock against McDavid to be put in the same camp as them at this point in his career is the fact that he hasn't won a championship.
What year was Lemieux drafted again? He was 84, right? Took him about the
Lemieux, same. He played in the 90s.
Yeah, well,
but let's say
because Lemieux won in 91, was drafted in 84. That's 7 years. McDavid has been in the league for 8 now. How long was Gretzky? Gretzky would have been.
He was drafted in. Wasn't McDavid drafted in...
He was drafted in 2016.
15? Wasn't he drafted in 2015? I'm pretty sure he was drafted in 2015.
I think you're right. Yeah, I think you're right. So 2015...
So it's been 9 years for him.
Okay. Yeah, so it's been a while for him. And Gretzky was obviously pretty early on, but comparing anyone to Gretzky just isn't fair. Gretzky won, I think, came in the league in 80, 81... One in 84, I think, was his first one, because he had some trouble getting by the Islanders and Flyers. But he definitely won. I don't remember if he won in 83, but he definitely won in 84. I think that was the first one. But anyway,
I think
my point was more the fact that I actually, whether he be like a year or two behind it, I actually feel like he's sort of right on schedule in a weird way. I wouldn't have expected him to win one by now. I think this is the teams he's had in the last little bit. I didn't expect as much as you can hype them up, and you can hype them up as much as you want. But I've been saying for the last little while, like you pointed out, pretty much right off the jump, depth was a huge issue for them. They never could find solid goaltending. They were switching goaltender almost every year, and I mean there was a ton of things you could nitpick on those teams, and it showed. They didn't really get anywhere. I think the farthest they got was the conference final when they lost to that would have been the Vegas year. So yeah, when they lost to Vegas, and now they finally filled all those holes. As much as I hate Stuart Skinner as a goaltender, he's doing a good job, and he's doing exactly what they need him to do. And their depth looks good. Everything about that team is looking really, really solid. And I think you got a lot of reasons to be worried if you're Florida. I think if I heard about this series going into the playoffs, I would probably be going, Florida in 6, Florida in 5, something like that. I don't know. It started. I think I say we leave our predictions for who we think is going to win till the very end, just to keep things a little spoopy. But at least to me, I think it's definitely very interesting now. Where I don't know where I land on it. Did they just beat Dallas because they're hot? Are they going to cool down at some point here? And suddenly it's a completely different series against Florida. There's a lot of questions going into this one, which certainly makes it interesting. Like, what if McDavid can't get going? What if Draisaitl slows down? Like, there's so many things on the Edmonton side and they're taking on Florida, who are pretty much the model of consistency now. This is their second straight finals. They're due for one. They're due for one bad. And I don't know. It's an interesting matchup. It's as far as I'll go.
Yep. And in terms of, just to finish up talking about the Oilers, I think with this matchup, I think looking at the past series, I think there's one thing that kind of gives me confidence, and there's one thing that kind of scares me. And I think the one thing that gives me confidence is the fact that in their series against Dallas, the Oilers had their biggest strength essentially taken away for a lot of the series, and they were still able to win. And that's the power play, where Dallas didn't give up a lot of, they didn't take a lot of penalties, and Edmonton didn't convert on a lot of them. I don't quite have the stats for the last couple games they played, but the last time we talked about the Oilers, this might have even been, I don't know if this was the podcast that never got posted, but we were talking about them at one point, and I remember looking at the power play stats for the Oilers.
That was last week.
And we were, I think at game 4 by this point, and they hadn't scored a power play goal. Yeah, so if you're an avid trick play listener, you remember that. But I think that's impressive, just to say their power play wasn't clicking on all cylinders like it had been all playoffs, where we were talking about it as one of the better power plays we've ever seen, or we were talking about it as the reason they're going far in the playoffs. They had it taken away, and they were still able to win against probably the best team roster-wise in the Western Conference. That gives me a lot of confidence. The one thing that scares me is the consistency of Stuart Skinner. You look at his performance in Game 6 against Dallas, fantastic. McDavid came out and said, hey, he stole the game for us. Edmonton, I think, only had 10 shots in that entire game. They did not play well, except for a fantastic goal by McDavid and a good shot by Hyman. You look at a performance like that, you look at how he's played throughout the rest of the playoffs, and you just kind of have to hope the hot streak keeps going. Because it wasn't that long ago that we were talking about Calvin Pickard coming in and saving the Oilers from how terribly Stuart Skinner was playing. So I think those are the two things that kind of scare me. It's one of them, the Oilers have shown that they can kind of take a blow and keep going. And the other one, I think, the whole Stuart Skinner, Calvin Pickard thing almost ended their playoff run when Stuart Skinner was playing very poorly. I don't know. I think you have to hope that Skinner keeps playing to this level, or else I don't think they have much of a chance.
Yeah, if Skinner slows down, they're done. It's as simple as that. If Skinner stops playing at the style, if anything gets him stopped, it's over for Edmonton. If you have to rely on Pickard, it's done. We crossed that bridge earlier on in the playoffs. That would have been 2 or 3 weeks ago now, where we put out that video. And the funny thing is, by the time that had been released, I think Skinner was starting again, which was absolutely hilarious. But I mean, I agree with you on that one. I think that's the point you made right off the jump, I think, is really important about that Edmonton and Dallas series. They beat them at 5-on-5. That's the crazy thing. I would not have predicted that. I don't think anybody could have predicted that. I think the big storyline going into that series was Dallas has them 5-on-5 any day of the week. If they stay out of the box, it's over. Funnily enough, if they don't take penalties if Edmonton doesn't take penalties and Dallas doesn't take penalties, Dallas wins. Edmonton has the best power play. They have the best penalty kill. They win that way. They win 5-on-5. Edmonton, if they can force Dallas to take penalties, that's Edmonton's series. And the funny thing was, they couldn't do that. Dallas played clean, and they beat them anyway, which is an insanely impressive thing. They beat easily the deepest team in the West, other than maybe Vegas, who Dallas beat in the first round, and they just completely destroyed them. And I mean, it's got to be a scary thing if you're a Florida fan, if you're watching from that Florida side, as high as you have to be on that Florida team at this point, just based on what they were able to do to the Rangers and Bruins for that matter. I mean, it's an insane. This is going to be a fun series. I'm still scared for Edmonton a little bit. I'm still a little scared. This certainly is going to be the closest of the series I think we've seen out of the last couple Canadian teams that have gone to the finals. I mean, I think Montreal, that was a foregone conclusion. Them going against the Lightning. All of us in Canada were crossing our fingers, but we all knew. We all knew before it even got started that there wasn't a good chance. Montreal was beat up. They just weren't the same team that the Lightning were. everybody knew going into that year the Lightning were the team to win, the team to beat. And even going back to 2011, I think that was the last one before then, in Bruins and Canucks. That one was very, very close, but I think the Bruins were really good that year. I don't know. I guess that one was probably the last close one.
I think it's probably the closest since 2011.
Yeah.
Because I mean that was a Game 7.
Yeah.
And I think, yeah, because I think even then, it doesn't sound like you're going back that far, but that's still like what, 13 years? I was in like first grade when that happened.
I remember riding the bus when that series was happening.
I do too. Yeah, no, nobody from Canada since. You had Montreal in 2021, and you had Vancouver in 2011, and then I think you have to go back. The last one before that, another Game 7, was the Oilers losing to Carolina. So, looking back at both of those, other than Montreal, that there was lots of heartbreakers in there for Canada. 3 lost Game 7s. I think we gotta hope that doesn't. If you're cheering
And
for
the
the
one
Oilers, you gotta hope
before
that doesn't happen again.
Edmonton was 0-4.
Yes. That was the other Game 7 I was talking about. We don't talk about that one in Calgary.
We don't talk about that one. That one still hurts.
Yeah, it was in. But one last thing I want to say about the Oilers before, if we want to talk about the Panthers a little bit. Another thing that Florida has to be scared for, you mentioned it a little bit, in terms of the Oilers beating Dallas 5-on-5, I think they get a little bit of that strength back against the Panthers, in terms of getting on the power play. If you look at the most penalties taken, this is according to StatMuse, the most penalties taken this playoffs, the number 1 team, most penalties taken, the Florida Panthers. Dallas, so they've taken 69 penalties this playoffs, and just to compare that to how disciplined the Stars have been this playoffs, they only took 46 throughout their whole playoff.
Impressive.
So that's very impressive. The Oilers are definitely going to get a lot more chance, especially with how physical a lot of this Florida lineup is, starting with the 2 Flames in this lineup, and that's Tkachuk and Bennett.
Yeah, and that's going to be a huge factor too, because you know that there's a little bit of a chip on their shoulder too with their time in Calgary. There's a whole country, or no, there's a whole city on their shoulders right now, because the last thing in between Edmonton and a cup right now is Tkachuk and Bennett, and that's really fun. That's another reason I'm kind of cheering for Florida. I've met Bennett. I never got to meet Tkachuk, but still, he seems like a pretty cool dude, even with what he did to the whole city in Calgary. I don't know. I'm very excited to be able to watch them in the finals here. Again, obviously, they were in last year, but this one feels more real. I'll say that. I think last year Vegas was the team to beat the whole run for the most part. Everybody knew they were really, really good. And even going into that series, I think most people would have told you Vegas was the favorite. And I can certainly say I wasn't that surprised when Vegas came out on top. And now we're sitting on the other side where Florida's looking like a pretty big powerhouse with the teams they've beaten to get here. Just looking at the past history, their playoff success. Sorry if there's any background noise being picked up. I do have there's a family near me on a big swing, but yeah, I don't know. I like Florida a lot just overall as a team, and I mean a big reason they're good is they're very physical. They're a very physical team. They have a lot of things that work in their favor in that way, and that's not necessarily a good matchup for them, I think, against Edmonton. Not to say that I don't think they could push Edmonton around a little bit, but if they go in the box too many times and you let McDavid and Draisaitl and Bouchard do what they do, it's going to get a little scary out there. And I don't know, I don't have Florida's penalty kill percentage in front of me, but off the top of my head, I'm going to assume it's not incredible. Or it's probably pretty good, but I've never heard anything about their penalty kill that makes me feel confident in a situation where they're taking 4 or 5, maybe not 3 or 4 a game. Let's say that.
Florida, just to interject quickly to give you that stat, Florida actually has the second best penalty kill in the playoffs.
Okay, well then there you go. 2%. Then I'm talking out of my ass, and that makes me feel a little bit better.
They take a lot, but they're good. Yeah.
Well, you have to be if you're taking a lot. You have to be, right? And I think that's going to be a big conversation in the locker room going into this one with Coach Paul Maurice, is just like, if you guys are going to be taking penalties, you guys better get ready to go once things shit hits the fan and McDavid starts doing McDavid things. And I'm excited for this one, though. It's going to be good. I think that power play is going to be huge for Edmonton, though. I think that's got to be a big storyline. I said that going into the Dallas series as well, but you got to think that's super important in this one. I mean, you're not going to beat them otherwise. You beat Dallas 5-on-5, sure, but even going into the playoffs, I would have told you Florida's better than Dallas. I think there's a lot of teams on the eastern side that's better than a lot of other teams on the western side, and I think Florida beats Dallas fairly easily. And now that we're here in a situation, Edmonton versus Dallas, or Edmonton versus Florida, it's going to be interesting. It's going to be a good one.
Yeah, it definitely is. I mean, you talk about how this feeling more real, and I feel like for Florida, and I feel like that has a lot to do with how last year they were the underdogs, right? Like, they barely snuck into the playoffs. They had the upset against Boston and kind of rode that to the final. And even then, it was more of a Cinderella run that you think, okay, when is this going to run out? But that's not at all the case this year. This year, they came in as the favorites, right? And every series other than maybe the one against the Rangers, like, you think, oh yeah, they're going to win this series. They were, I believe they were first. Well, were they still first in the Atlantic? Yeah, they were. I believe they were still first in the Atlantic. I might have to double check that.
I think so.
But that's an incredibly tough division. When you're looking at some of the teams that are coming out of that division, you look at Boston, you look at Toronto, you look at Tampa, like, looking at all of those teams, it's one of the, I think, the hardest divisions in hockey. And to see them go from a team that's barely snuck into the playoffs to being the first team in that division, it shows that the kind of development they went in the playoffs last year stuck. I think a lot of that has to do with some of the players that have broken out for them. I think you have to look at Bobrovsky and net, first of all. He's played fantastic. It was looking like a bit of a poor contract for a while, but the last couple of years he's really stepped it up. And then I think Reinhart is the other one, where it's like he's been playing so much better this season than anything that he's shown in his past however many years in the league at this point.
Which is pretty impressive too, because he's no slouch. It's not like his career year has come out of nowhere. He's a very, very good player, and he's shown that in the past. But yeah, no, I agree with you. He's very much stepped it up, and that's huge for Florida. I mean, it's a big reason why they've been so good. You can list off the elite talent they have at this point: Kachuk, Barkov, Reinhart, Ekblad. The list goes on. Bobrovsky, right? Like, normally when you think about elite teams, they have like a lot of good depth, and they have a lot of, like, they maybe have one or two stars. Florida's got it in more when it comes to that, right? Like, even on the other side with Edmonton, when I think stars, I think McDavid, Draisaitl, list stops. Bouchard's getting there, but I don't think he's there yet. And
Nugent Hopkins?
I'd put Bouchard before I put Nugent Hopkins, but all
right.
Yeah, I don't think Nugent Hopkins there yet. He's the honorable mention, because out of all the players in the finals this year, he might be the one who's he has a cup coming for him at some point here. Yeah. Especially, I mean, he's been in Edmonton for, when was he drafted? 2011, 2012? Yeah, he's been around for a while. And got to give him props for that. At the very least. He definitely deserves something.
Sticking it out.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, for sure.
Yeah, 2011.
Yeah, well, there you go. Even just, like, you look at the elite talent on both sides, it is, I don't know. I think Florida's definitely the favorite. I haven't taken the time to look at any betting odds because I don't care, but I think if I would be very surprised to see if those said anything different, and if they do, I'd be hammering Florida, because, I mean, it feels like this is their year. It feels like this is their year, just in every way. They've beaten all of the really hard teams they have to beat, and now they're just facing Edmonton. And it's a weird thing to say that they're just facing Edmonton, right? But just look at, like, Rangers. The Rangers, it felt like this was their year as well. I mean, Hurricanes felt like it was their year, right? Boston, always a threat in the playoffs. It's just, like, Florida's beaten everybody, and it's really starting to show.
Yeah. And I don't know. I do think to a certain point you feel like this is Edmonton's year too. Just in terms of what I talked about of them finally getting past the threshold of beating a team with actual depth and playoff experience. Um, so I do think they are a pretty formidable challenge. You're right that Florida is the favorite. I'm looking at FanDuel right now, and they have Florida as the favorite, not by very much,
Okay.
but they do have them as a slight favorite. Um, I will kind of like we can get to our predictions here in a second. I'll kind of just ask you. I'll ask you just a super broad question. If you could put this matchup down to one aspect, one thing to say, like if this goes right for this team, they're gonna win. Like if Edmonton gets good goaltending, they're gonna win. If Kachuk plays well, if whatever, what is that for you to say? If this team does this, then that's deciding the Stanley Cup.
I think in a lot of ways it's Florida's cup to win. I think if things go the way that I think they might, Florida will win. But I think if Edmonton gets their power play going and has the same power play we saw against the Kings saw against Vancouver, if we see that power play, Stuart Skinner continues to play hot, continues to play the way he's been playing. If both of those things happen, I don't think it's one thing. I think both of those things need to happen. I think that Edmonton definitely has a shot at it. I still think that the series would go probably 6 or 7, but I think that would definitely make things a lot better for Edmonton. I think if they don't get their power play going, or if they don't get good goaltending from Skinner, it's going to be a very, very tough series for them. I don't think they'd be able to beat Florida 5-on-5 the same way that they beat Dallas. I think you got to get on the power play a bit more, and you got to score on the power play when you get those shots. I also think McDavid has to be going the whole series. There's been times in the playoffs he's been very, very good. Don't get me wrong, but there's a few games here and there where he's stayed off the scoreboard. None of that. I don't want to see a single pointless game out of McDavid in this finals. I think he's got to win Finals MVP. I think because there's been points where Draisaitl has been outplaying him. No more of that. That's got to stop here. And you got to think that that's the same thing in his head as well. This is, we talked about it at the beginning. This is McDavid's cup. This is the thing that makes him a legend. He can't be getting outplayed. He needs to be the guy. And I think at the end of the day, if all of those things happen, Edmonton will win the cup. But it needs to start with the power play and it needs to start with Skinner. Both of those things need to happen. Absolutely.
Yeah. And I'd agree with you. I think those are both like. I think if Edmonton wins the cup, it is going to be because of those two things. It's going to be because of the power play, and it's going to be because of Skinner. If I want to just kind of answer that question with something from Florida's side, I think the biggest thing for them is, are there which player, is it Kachuk? Is it Sam Bennett? Is it, I don't know, Ekblad, somebody who's going to step up and make McDavid have those pointless nights you're talking about? Because for every McDavid pointless night where it doesn't look like he's playing great, I think you got to have great defense, whether it's B from your forwards or B from players like Ekblad or Brandon Montour or whoever it may be. I think that's going to be a key for Florida. I think if you can slow down McDavid, then I think the rest of this kind of falls into place. Because even though Edmonton's depth is a lot better, everything still starts and ends with him. Because you're right, the focus is going to be on him. All the pressure is going to be on him. So if he starts faltering, like even though depth guys like Adam Henrique or Matthias Janmark, like even though those guys have been playing a lot better than a lot of the Oilers' depth in the past has, you're not going to get like Matthias Janmark to Connor Brown to win the Stanley Cup. You're going to get Connor McDavid.
But wouldn't that be a hell of a call?
Connor
Matthias Ekholm
set
across to Connor Brown, and the Oilers have won the cup. That would be such a legendary moment. Honestly, if Connor Brown wins the cup winner, I will die happy. That would be hilarious.
Does that mean all of our takes for how stupid the Connor Brown signing were
Oh my God.
Finally proven wrong?
I would eat that though. I would be perfectly okay with that. Connor Brown did nothing. All playoffs, all regular season, nothing, nada. People were talking about him being a first line mate for McDavid. Never happened. Then all of a sudden he comes in and he's the hero. McDavid's done jack shit. Connor Brown, 20-point finals, 5 points a game. It's gonna happen. Full sweep for the Oilers. It's my prediction.
It's gonna happen. That's the key. It's the Connor Brown breakout game. breakout finals.
That's not the key. That's not the key. That's just what's gonna happen.
It's just what's gonna happen.
It's not the
just
key.
might
It's
as well
just
bet all your
destiny.
life savings on it. Betting with trick play again.
Oh, sweet Jesus. I don't know if I ever told that story on the podcast. I don't know if, now that I think about it, I don't even know if I've got a cousin named Jordan who he tuned into a couple episodes around Christmas, and I haven't talked to him much since then, so I have no clue if he still listens. But if you do, Jordan, I am so sorry, but the Trick Play podcast will not be becoming a betting podcast. That was the one thing he said. He was like, "You guys should talk about betting." It's like, no, it's not gonna happen. Sadly, neither me nor Caleb know anything about betting, and I would not listen to either of our advice.
You could put money on like the takes we randomly spew out, but I don't think that would go very well for you.
No, it probably wouldn't. I mean, I have thought before, maybe what we should do for like the NFL season or something like that. If we end up doing like a weekly preview, we should call each game, and then we could keep like a scoreboard in the corner. I think that'd be cool. Yeah. I've seen people do that before. That might be fun. Cool. That might be fun, but I don't think we'd do more than that. I think that is about as far as I'd go for like mainly because I'd want the score.
That's not even betting.
And exactly. Unless we bet something at the end of the year, like jumping in the ocean. But
yeah, I'm still one down.
You're still one down.
That's as far as trick play betting is concerned.
Your debt will continue to grow. But I think if we did that, I'd want the scoreboard there just to show, like, wow, yes, you can bet on all of the picks Simon made this week, but he is also 14 for 246. So maybe play it, maybe count your pennies a little bit more before you do that.
No.
Do you want to give
Speaking
our
of trick
big
play
picks?
betting?
Yeah, do you want to make the big picks?
If you were a betting man, who would you pick to win the Stanley Cup final?
Am I going first, or are you going first?
You can go first. I'm intrigued.
Well, I think I've been pretty clear on mine for the most part. Florida is the big favorite. It feels like their year as much as it feels like it's McDavid's year as well. Like there's a lot of things leaning towards him potentially. This is like his moment. This is the thing that really this is the moment he elevates himself into the Gretzky, Lemieux, Bobby Orr. This is his legendary run right here. Nah, I don't think so. I think we're going to see a bit more of a... I think McDavid will win one in the next 5 years, if you want another prediction out of me? Yes. I do think the Oilers will win at least sometime in the next 5 years. I don't think this is their year. I don't think Florida goes to the finals twice and loses both times. I just don't see it. Like, that would be crazy. I honestly think that the outrage, if Florida went to the Cup twice and lost both times, would be insane. It would be insane. I honestly... Off the top of my head, I don't even know if I can name... What do you say, sorry?
From who? Who's going to be outraged?
Florida
fans?
Yeah, Florida. Of course they're going to be outraged. Are you kidding?
I don't know. I think there would be a whole lot more outrage if Edmonton loses. I don't care that they haven't been there.
That'll be the conversation too, which is exactly why it'll... There's going to be outrage on either side. I'm not saying that, but I think
that's how losing in the finals generally.
Yeah,
works.
Exactly. But no matter what, there'll be outrage. But I at least think losing twice back to back in the finals, no. Florida needs one here, and I think this is theirs. I think McDavid still has a lot of time. I think assuming him and Draisaitl stay together for a little bit longer, they'll win one eventually. I just don't think this is it. I think that they've... As good as they looked against Dallas, they've shown at points. They've shown weakness at points, whether it be goaltending, whether it even be the offense slowing down, not being able to get on the power play. There's been things that have stopped them from being able to succeed, and they're just, I don't know, man. I haven't seen the same thing on Florida's side. So, if to give my take, I'm going to say Florida. I think it's in 7. I think it goes to Game 7. I think we're going to get a very, very good series. It's going to be very close. We're going to see a lot of good things out of McDavid. But I think when the final bell rings, it'll be Mr. Matthew Tkachuk lifting the cup. That is my prediction.
Yeah.
Take it to the house.
I am going to take it to the house. Take it. Bet
Take
your
it to
life
the
savings
casino.
on it.
Yeah, take it to the bank.
I'm gonna go the opposite direction with this one.
Okay.
I do think I agree with a lot of what you said, but I do think that series against Dallas changed my mind a lot about the Oilers in terms of answering a lot of my questions. Can Stuart Skinner sustain good play for the length of an entire round? Yes, he can. Like, we saw that out of him. We saw that rebound. And despite all of the pressure that was put on him after being benched in the playoffs, he was able to come back and perform. So I think that puts a lot of faith in me to be able to say he will be able to form at least to a level where he can get them, where he won't lose them, the finals. I think that's a big thing. And I think the thing we already talked about with the Oilers being able to beat the Stars on 5-on-5. I know Florida's a better 5-on-5 team, but I don't think you should downplay Dallas. Dallas was my Stanley Cup pick, and they were also a fantastic 5-on-5 team, so playoff tested. One of the reasons I took them to win the Stanley Cup at the start of the year was just saying, like, they've been so close so many times. Like, you think the playoff experience they have would take them over teams like Edmonton, and this Dallas team beat the last 2 Stanley Cup champions, right, in Vegas and Colorado. Like, I think that was honestly, like, even though you could say Florida maybe is a better team on paper, I think that's just as impressive of a win, if not more so, than it would be to beat Florida in my eyes, just because of how good I think that Dallas team is. So I think that answered a lot of my questions about them. And I do think the Oilers have a huge, even though obviously Florida has home ice advantage for the series, having a better record, I think Edmonton's home ice advantage is going to be so much more pronounced. I don't see them losing at home. I think they're going to get a lot more opportunities in the power play than they did in Dallas. I have a feeling about this. And you can say that the Panthers have been to the final last year. They've got the playoff experience. But I really like the quote from Chris Knobloch this week, where he came out and said, basically, playoff experience doesn't mean shit. Look at the Buffalo Bills. Talking about them losing 4 times in a row in the 90s. And he's right. I don't think it's going to mean anything that Florida's been here before. I think Edmonton is ready, and I'm going to pick them to win in 6.
Ooh, 6. Whoa. Okay. So there's both of our picks. We're both on opposite sides of that, which means that we get a very nice graphic coming out probably the same time as this episode comes out. Maybe I'll put something up there. Simon versus Caleb. The finals matchup of whatever. You get what I mean. We'll throw something together. Those are our picks. Florida in 7. Edmonton in 6. We'll see what ends up happening. I do think no matter what way it goes, I think it's 7. That is the one thing I'll disagree with you on. I think Edmonton can win it, but I do think they'd win it in 7. I don't think they would be able to. I don't. 4 games to 2
I feel like a lot of
against
matchups
Florida.
It would go 7, but
yeah, I know,
I don't
that's
know,
true.
because I don't. And I see Edmonton wins all 3 of their home games, and they steal 1 in Florida. There's your 4-2.
Oh yeah. Okay. I see where you're coming from with that. Okay. I see you. Yeah, no, it'll be good. It'll be a good series. I'm excited for it. NBA Finals coming up next year. Up next, we have got ourselves the NBA